issue. Some reason it went dark, but it looks like we're good.
Okay.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Alton Aimable from Tropicalfete. It's Caribbean Heritage Month in the United States, and we're celebrating authors, great writers, our people, connecting. And today we're here in the Brooklyn Public Library space with a wonderful author, a wonderful person. She goes by the name of Meagan Sylvester. Her title says music sociologist, author, researcher, senior lecturer from Trinidad and Tobago. That's a big introduction, a lot of titles to her name, and we're going to go for each of those titles as well as explore a wonderful book she's part of with a bunch of great Caribbean authors from all over the region. So, welcome.
Okay, thank you very much for having me, Alton. It's a pleasure to be here with Tropical Fete, celebrating Caribbean American Heritage Month.
Beautiful. First question.
Hmm.
When I look at that lengthy title, it says music sociologist. Does that come first before everything else?
Okay, so thanks for that question, Alton. And indeed, music sociologist, it is styled that way to come before everything else, but it is really a culmination of the work as a researcher. All right, and it becomes important to understand where is this all coming from. I'm formally trained as a sociologist, and so that brings with it an understanding of man and woman in the society. How do we look at issues of stratification and identity with regards to race and class and color and ethnicity and all the other ways in which persons can be stratified? We look at gender as well. And so it becomes important to consider that. I added on to that a focus on music. And so that is where we get music sociology really coming from. And the music in particular that I look at, of course, you mentioned earlier that I am from Trinidad and Tobago. So my focus is, of course, the music that is indigenous to Trinidad and Tobago. And in particular, we're looking at Calypso and Soca music. And of course, all of the derivatives that come out of Soca music, meaning you would have chutney soca, parang soca, raga soca, and those kind of derivatives coming out. And so it becomes important to understand that is really what the music sociology is. Specifically, I look at the lyrics of calypso and soca. And so that of soca music. And so that is where you would see an interrogation of a sociological analysis being brought to bear on the calypso art form and the soca art form, looking specifically at its lyrics.
Beautiful. So, let's start off with the lyrics. A lot of the lyrics in soca these days have trend to jam and wine, drinking. Um, you know, you put rum in a song and you might guarantee a hit.
Mhm.
And how does that affect society?
Right.
That becomes a part of our culture, good or bad. Rum and alcohol and drinking and is part of it. Where you stand on that? How do you see that affecting us?
Right, and so thank you so much for that question, Alton, because that is actually at the center of what I actually look at in terms of the analysis of music and lyrics. So if we make a demarcation only for this type of discussion between calypso music and soca music. Calypso music is considered to be mother music, so it is where it starts for us in terms of our analysis, and then soca now is a branch out of that tree. But what we recognize is that what is the purpose of calypso music? It would have originally started in terms of its, genesis, coming from the slave plantation. All right, it's what enslaved persons would have used to treat with or to deal with the atrocities of slavery. All right, so you would have had coming down in generations an understanding of calypsos that spoke more or speak more to politics or governance, and we think about what was taking place on the plantation. We had slave masters, we had overseers, yeah, and the slaves at that time would have been speaking about the way in which the plantation would have been ruled. Now we juxtapose that to what's happening in modern society, and we see that the political calypsos are really speaking about what is it that the calypsonian is trying to say to us about the political directorate or the persons who are in opposition who both make up the government. And so this is where we see that continuation of the political calypso. We also speak about social commentary, dealing with all sorts of other issues taking place in society. You know, domestic violence, family, male-female relationships, issues related to what's happening with the young people in society, education. So we see that it becomes important to understand what is the purpose and function of calypso music. Juxtaposing that now to soca music and where that comes in, that is a music that, when we realize in the 1970s with Ras Shorty I, getting into a whole discussion through the calypso lyric or the versioning of the soca lyric to say we need something with a little more tempo. And it is from those early beginnings that we begin to understand that soca music had a different purpose to calypso music, though they are coming out of the same root. And so there is that element of jam and wine, there is that element of slap lyrics, there is that element of wild abandon, because this is linked specifically to the carnival festivities. And so it becomes important to understand that. But before soca music had its heyday, we recognize that calypso music was the music that accompanied the carnival festivities. And so it becomes important to understand that both calypso music and soca music have lyrics that are political in nature, social in nature. You also have smutty calypsos, as well as you have jam and wine and slack soca songs, but you also have serious soca songs. So you see that you're getting that interplay between, all right, the serious topics that are affecting the society coming or being represented in both calypso music and soca music. But what tends to happen if we're talking about the popularity of soca music, we tend to realize that because soca music is sort of serves a different type of purpose, the songs that become more prominent tend to be the songs that are about wine and jam and about slackness and about, you know, the way in which men may be speaking or singing about women. And so those are the ones that become more popular. But it becomes important to also look at the ones that are using soca music, rhythm and beat, but also have accompanied serious lyrics about what's taking place in the society.
My favorite part of calypso soca music is humorous calypso. Um, I love comedy. It's like a stress reliever.
Right.
You know, um, have you explore in terms of the comical calypso, how it affects people? It's one of the undergrounds, not told stories, not popular, but it has its purpose.
Most definitely. And of course, if we're talking about one of the known proponents of the humorous calypso in Trinidad, we speak about Calypsonian Funny. All right, the name says it all. You know, he sings humorous calypsos, and that is also another category that we can speak to in terms of understanding the representation in calypso about what is taking place in the society. So I started off talking about sociology and its role in terms of identity. But that is also what happens when you marry music and sociology, looking at calypso music or soca music. What is the music saying about the society? What are the lyrics saying about the society? But also, as you rightly said, Alton, what is the society getting from the lyrics? So basically, you have that sort of the artist or the artiste pens or sings the song that may have been written for him or her. They then speak to what's happening in society. People or the audience internalize that and start to then reflect on their own society about what is taking place. So you have that symbiotic relationship taking place between what is the role of the lyric to speak to what is taking place, but it also is representative of what is the reality. But the audience gets an opportunity to consider what is really taking place in the society.
The next title says researcher. Not getting too old yet. What has been research on your end in reference to music, reference to probably medicine, um, psychology, you know, motion, brain development, because music plays an important role in that, and not just the music sometimes, just playing an instrument or the beat or the rhythm, just African drums. And if you could speak to that.
Okay, and so specifically, what I do is I focus on the sociological aspect. So I have not done a lot of research, let's say, on health, physical health. But one of the things that I'm doing most recently is looking at the relationship between music and mental health. Why? Arising out of COVID-19 and the impact of the pandemic, we of course know that it was a depressing time for a lot of persons who had coping challenges or who just had to deal with the issue of death. Death of their loved ones, death of their co-workers, and then illness and sickness that was also part of the trajectory of COVID-19. You find that a lot of adults, but in particular here I want to look at young people and how they would have been using or how they ought to use music as a sort of curative balm to treat with depression and mental health. Because what you find is lyrics are very powerful. We have recognized if we flip it in terms of not looking necessarily at good lyrics, and we look at bad lyrics. What are bad lyrics? Lyrics that incite violence, lyrics that incite ideas and concepts of suicide and depression and doing things that go against the status quo. Yeah? That is what we mean. And there are a lot of songs that speak to that. And we know that young people have a tendency to listen to music that speaks to their mood. And so how do we treat with using music as and the lyrics as a curative balm to switch the mood, to switch the negativity and bring in the positivity? And so what we can then do is introduce to young people songs that have positive lyrics that can then allow for them to have the opportunity to get a different perspective about what is taking place in the society. And so that is one of the ways in which I think that we should really be looking at music, we should really be looking at um, the impact of COVID-19, mental health, and how music can really transform that kind of scenario.
Yes.
So, there's a kind of a book club.
Oh, we have a program going on, so you have to speak someone out there.
Okay, just that's what he said, come in and act. Oh,
And so that's important. In terms of other aspects of research, I've done a lot of research on the Calypso art form itself, in terms of understanding, just as I said earlier on, issues of race. So what are some of the songs that speak specifically to race as a theme? Then we look at issues of ethnicity. We also speak to issues of, other types of ways in which gender issues, male female dynamics, you know, um, there are issues regarding colorism, because that is a big issue in terms of race relations, colorism, etc. And that becomes so important. And so those are ways in which persons from the Caribbean identify one another. They demarcate the society, it's stratified in that way. And so I've done a lot of research on that. Because we have had a tradition of calypso music and other genres being a part of our musical landscape, you find that there's that hybridization taking place. So, for example, Kaiso jazz music. So I've done some research on Kaiso, which would have come from calypso and jazz music, and the fusion that would have taken place in the representation of some of our music. I would have also been looking at soca music, as I said earlier in this talk today, where I looked at chutney soca music, raga soca music, parent soca music, and groovy soca music as derivatives coming out of soca music and how that is having or has had an impact on representations from the different groups in society. So when we talk about chutney soca music, we're talking about that fusion with the Asian population and with the Afro Trinidadian population. Yeah, when we talk about param soca music, we're talking about traditional Christmas music in Trinidad and Tobago and how we fuse that with the soca beat and rhythm. And so that, so this is what we're talking about, the hybridization of music. So I've done research on that as well.
The If you have to give me a lyric or a song or a couple of songs just randomly off the top of your head that just sticks to you.
Which genre? Are you talking about Calypso in
Calypso, we've
particular?
been talking Calypso.
One of my favorite songs is, of course, by the king of Calypso, of course, the Mighty Sparrow. And I also always reference his song, The Good Citizen. And that is a song that has had an impact on me as a Calypso researcher, as an individual, as a Trinidadian or Trinbagonian, speaking to the whole issue of when does someone really become a good citizen? But the issue about that song is that it's a sort of, it's a twist on words, which is the whole point of Calypso. Because you think by the title of the song that it's going to be about just, verses about a good citizen, but it actually speaks about the ways in which people are not good citizens and all of the wrong that is done. And then the question is asked, when do you really become a good citizen? So it's really quite very interesting, to listen to that song, and that song has really had a lot of impact on me because it touches on the political aspect, the social aspect, not so much the humor, but it really gives you a sense of it. For me, it's sort of like an overarching, perspective about what Calypso can do and how it can speak to both political and social in one song. Yeah.
For me, a couple of things would jump out would be being Bomber, every rope ever end. That
Right.
lyric always stick to me.
Right.
How creative, how this marvelous creation. Singing Sandra, the book was dedicated to voices from the ghetto, and how much of a powerful song that is. Like you hear it as a cry. Um, Slavery,
Right.
not just the song by Sparrow, but then the way you sing it.
Right.
He sings it.
Right.
You feel like being whipped on
Right.
your back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these would jump at me
Mm-hmm.
and say like, wow, that is powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to lecture, your lecture, you can tell us some of the places that you have lectured at.
Woo. All right. So
I know that's a mouthful.
So I have lectured in spaces other than Trinidad and Tobago. Formerly, I would have lectured at the University of the West Indies, but at the Luna campus in Jamaica. I would have also had the opportunity to do some lecturing at the Cave Hill campus in Barbados. This is all under, of course, the University of the West Indies. And of course, I would have been doing much work at the University of the West Indies, St. Vincent campus in Trinidad and Tobago. However, I have taught at community colleges as well, right? So there are community colleges in Trinidad and Tobago that I would have taught at, COSTAT in particular, which is the College of Science, and Applied Arts of Trinidad and Tobago. Also speaking to the whole issue of the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, where this is the title that I have now, the senior lecturer. And so, but I've also taught, because teaching is what I do. I've also taught in the secondary school. So before I became a lecturer, I was just a regular teacher, and then I would have graduated and then, moved up. So this is why this work is so important to me, because it's all about educating people on the whole. Of course, there are young people who don't have the kind of requisite information and knowledge, and so I see this as an important part of the work that I do. But I've discovered, because I've also done public lectures, where I go to libraries, where I go to, different institutions and speak. I may go to a secondary school and speak to the young people. And what you realize is that the teachers stay back. They stay to listen and they say, Miss, I never knew about this. It's a good thing that you came to speak to the young people. But I also learned today. So you recognize that there's so much information that needs to be shared, and I really take the opportunity to make sure that when I'm treating with an audience and I try to explain and make sure that they really grasp an understanding of why Calypso as an art form is so important to us and what it really says about us and who we are.
As a lecturer, and Tropicalfete as an organization where we have a performance unit that go out to colleges and different locations to do things. I think the definition of what carnival is has changed drastically, where we need your services in more universities, in more schools, because it's sometimes painful to sit down in the audience and watch a presentation whilst you're waiting to get on stage. And the culture is being mantle all over the place, and this is what passes as culture, this is what passes as canon. So, I'm just saying that your work is valuable,
Mm.
and you need to be cloned, or we need several of you to actually start,
Mhm.
having, you know, Caribbean culture, Carnival culture, West Indian culture
Mhm.
as a course in
Mhm.
the school and be taught by someone
Mhm.
who's competent
Mhm.
of that
Okay.
of that. Because too many times we do events and it's what's presented makes me cringe inside,
Yes, yes, yes.
inside. So
Well,
that's my advice.
thank you, Alton, for saying that. And I do take the work very seriously. But what I think is there's a commercial aspect to Carnival. There's a commercial aspect to the presentation of music for audiences. And so sometimes that might be what you're seeing in terms of how people make a decision to present the art form. So, what does Carnival mean? Where do we see Carnival taking place? It's across the diaspora, but it may mean different things for different persons. Now, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, and of course, Trinidadians and Tobagoans believe that we are the carnival that started it all, right? The greatest show on earth, the mother of all carnivals. And what becomes important to understand is that our festival is really linked. It's a pre-Lenten festival, so there is a meaning behind it, other than just a time to get into the street and do the masquerade. Yeah?
Yep.
And it becomes important to understand that as part of what is important about carnival. So you get involved in the revelry, you get involved in the mass playing, you get involved, the carnival riots, there's the reinterpretation or the reenactment of all of these historical activities that would have taken place. It culminates in carnival. And then on Ash Wednesday, people go and ask for forgiveness. So it becomes important to understand when you have carnival festivities that um, in other times of the year, but apart from that, may not be linked to any sort of religious connotation or any type of historical precedence. The presentation of the festival is going to be different. See what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we get to the book, as a researcher, a lecturer, in Caribbean music, where do you see that in the next generation, maybe next 100 years?
Mm.
Uh, because as things change and genres merge, uh, do you see the art form of calypso, the art form of soca being held the way it should be, and looking at trends and how just researching you could project what the future is?
Well, one of the things I want to say at this time is that I am currently in an organization called TUCO, which is the Trinbago Unified Calypsonians Organization. Of course, this is from Trinidad and Tobago. And it is the sole organization that is responsible for the dissemination and the overseeing of the Calypso art form in Trinidad and Tobago. In that organization, I am a board member, and the position that I hold is the education and research officer. One of the things that I do, and this gets to the heart, Holton, of answering your question specifically, how do we ensure that this art form has continuity? Yeah? Years from now, with the generations that currently exist and taking it beyond. One of the things that I do is I make sure that I go to, as I said earlier, I go to public spaces. So I don't only publish, I don't only teach, but I go to public spaces where persons gather just because they have an interest in it. Yeah, and I go to libraries across Tobago and Trinidad, and any other space that I get to go in anywhere in the world where I'm at. And I speak to the persons who would attend the sessions, and I do that education and I do that dissemination of the information, presenting them with research about the art form, and I take it theme by theme. Another thing that I do to ensure that you have that kind of continuity is the whole issue of going to secondary schools. And I also go to tertiary educational institutions because I think it becomes important for persons in those spaces who may have no interest in music, no interest in uh, carnival, no interest in festival culture, that they get to understand why it is so important to become involved in an understanding. Because as you were saying earlier, Alton, there's a historical component. And you have to know where you have come from to know what is going to happen. And so this is the line that I take: history, present, yeah, and future. And so by doing that, that is how we can ensure that there is continuity. And that 100 years from now, because one of the things we say in Tupo is, by Calypso our stories are told, but that Calypso itself will never die. Because the art form itself will never die. So even though Calypsonians may die, and persons who are speaking about the art form may die, the fact is that the art form remains. Yeah?
Thank you for answering that question. We're moving on to your book,
Yes.
um, of which you're one of the authors. It says Caribbean music.
Yes.
If you could tell us who are the co-authors,
Okay.
tell us about the book, who the book is dedicated to, and if you could read a passage from the book,
Okay,
we'll
sure.
be very thankful.
Okay, so this is a book that was recently published um, by the University of the West Indies Mona campus in Jamaica. It is really meant to be part of the series of interviewing the Caribbean, and it is focusing this particular volume focused on Caribbean music. I am one of the editors of this collection, along with Opal Palmer Hatista, who also hails from Jamaica. Some of the contributors to this journal: Jerome Tilapsing, you have Doreen Omad, you have Neil Armstrong, you have George McCulsey, Victoria Mogollon, you have Monica Mancera, you have Janique McKnight, and you have Kerry Johnson, just to name a few. And of course, I also have an article in there where I deal with the issue of femininity, womanhood, and gender justice. Because I felt that those are three critical issues when you're talking about gender issues now, in terms of the Calypso art form. The way that I style that particular article is looking at the woman in Calypso, because we haven't spoken about that today as yet. The woman in Calypso, and what is their experience being part of the art form. Because traditionally, Calypso is known to be an Afro, or a male dominated Afro art form. Yeah? And so I felt it was necessary to get the perspectives of women. What I started to do though, I intended to only look at the Calypso art form in that particular article, and then I realized that there's so many genres across Trinidad and Tobago that it becomes important to understand if women across various genres have a differing experience with regards to femininity, womanhood, and gender justice. How are they seen? Why do they style themselves in the particular way that they do for stage performances? It's all about costuming. It's all about representation. It's all about what is it that a woman wants to say when she goes on the stage to do the performance, even though she's singing about political issues or social commentary issues. Yeah? So that was one of the things that became very important for me in terms of being part of this publication and also being one of the authors.
And did any female Calypsonians express the hardship of being in that arena?
Yes.
Because the book is dedicated to Saint Sandra.
Right, yes. The book is dedicated to two persons in particular: Z. Edgel, who comes from Jamaica, and Saint Sandra, a female Calypsonian from Trinidad and Tobago. Um, as I said, I went across various genres in Trinidad and Tobago's musical landscape, but in particular, speaking to Calypsonians, or female Calypsonians, they did speak to the whole issue of how they're perceived. How do they express their femininity, right? The way in which they adorn or they attire themselves, the way in which they are considered, part of their womanhood, part of how they are seen, whether they are mothers, whether they are older women, whether they are younger women. How are they seen? How are they respected by their male counterparts? How are they respected or treated by other females in the business? And then I also would have looked at the issue of gender justice in terms of the way in which there's justice for the fact that they are females. What do they have to go through being on the road, being in a tent, being on a show, performing behind the scenes? How are they really seen? And one of the key things that I noted from the research, from the this qualitative approach that I took to understanding their life stories or their lived experiences, is the fact that depending on which band they were in, depending on the other musicians who are around them, the male musicians who are around them, depending on the type of gig that it is, they would have a differing experience. Yeah? And so if they were dealing with older, let's say if we look at continue talking about the Calypso album and they were dealing with older Calypsonians, they may have a particular view about a female entering that sacred male dominated space, as opposed to someone who may be in the jazz fraternity. And they now are having a different experience because that is not age specific, yeah, or race specific, so that there is that freedom. And so it becomes important. I also spoke to persons who were in Trinidad and Tobago. We have a sort of, sort of soft rock population or musical appreciation for that type of genre. And I spoke to some of the women in that and how they are treated with, and you found that once there was not this age-related perspective about the music, that people were able to flow freely in and out of the shadows, for want of a better word, but they received gender justice depending on the particular space that they were involved in. The issues of femininity was based on how they wanted to style themselves, but in particular, because I dealt with Calypso and Soca, the Soca artists felt that they were competing with a younger audience, or they had to present themselves to a younger audience so that they would adorn or attire themselves differently. So their expression of femininity and womanhood would have been different to some of the older artists. Yeah?
So back on the title, Caribbean music, and in the background we have a globe.
Yes.
And I mentioned to you earlier global dominance,
Right.
and the music and the genre and how we push forward and claiming what's ours and making it financially viable for the producers, the musicians, the songwriters, the marketing people behind it. Those are some of the elements that help us capture world dominance. Where we are today is I've seen great products,
Mhm.
but we have very small share, if any share, in the global musical market. And at the same time, I see Afrobeat, which recently just started. And if you listen closely to Afrobeat, a lot of the Afrobeat is actually soca beats, um, and that has gone global and ripping off millions. So I see you like, oh, don't ask that question. So the book is entitled Caribbean Music.
Right. Right.
And as a Caribbean person, um, I like to see our name in the highlights. I like to see in the Grammys. I like to hear it on the radio. I like to hear it coming there at a stadium, or Yankee Stadium, Jets playing.
Yeah.
I want to hear, I want to hear some pump up soca to get the athletes moving.
Right.
We need global dominance,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I just because of your title, I'm throwing that at you.
No
How could
problem.
we solve that problem?
Well, I think it's important to, we want to look at the Caribbean as a whole, but even when we start to look at the Caribbean, we look at the issue of the English-speaking Caribbean, the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, the French-speaking Caribbean, then you have the Dutch Caribbean, and you have what would have been the former Danish Caribbean, which is now the Virgin Islands of the United States, and some of the other islands, right, that the U.S. would have captured, or the U.S. would now be, owners of. And what you realize is that because that space, the Caribbean space, is divided, you will find that each of those spaces, the colonialized spaces, like the French and the Spanish and the Dutch and the English and the former Danish, what you have happening is that there is musical content emanating from that. So we have to understand that the Caribbean doesn't mean one thing alone. Secondly, we have different types of industries within the Caribbean. So, for example, in Jamaica, and Jamaican musical landscape is more developed, yeah, than let's say the one in Trinidad and Tobago or in Barbados or you understand, in the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, meaning that there is more prominence or there is more knowledge of Jamaican music than any other music coming out of the Caribbean. So to the extent where persons think that the Caribbean is just Jamaica, yeah?
Correct.
Persons who are outside of the Caribbean, that is. And so we have to understand what are some of the antecedents? What are some of the factors that would have gone into that sort of dominance? Because what we find is that that music, Jamaican music, whether it's reggae, whether it would have been ska, whether it would have been rocksteady, but whether it's dancehall and in this post dancehall phase, what you find happening is that they are out front. And so, what we have to recognize, if we are looking at Caribbean dominance within a global space, we would have to understand that the music that is already ahead would have to be the representative music in the initial stages. And so, we think about where is this global dominance going to come from? It has to go to the highest echelon. So, we think about Grammys. We think about, is there a category? Yeah, in the Grammys for dancehall and reggae, and we recognize that there is. And so that then says that there is that dominance at that level. If we're looking now at, you mentioned pumping up soca for the Jets, etc., to get the athletes going or to build vibes at the very least, we recognize that calypso music and soca music is behind, and there needs to be a force that pushes this type of music to the forefront to get to the kind of dominance that Jamaican music has. All right. We know that there's some artists that have done their part. We can speak about Masha Montano. We can speak about Destra Garcia. We can speak about Kes Differentala. We can speak about those persons and what they have done. We can speak about Patrice Roberts. We can speak about, to a lesser extent, some of the other artists, male and female, who have come out of Trinidad and Tobago, gone to the diasporic carnivals, and what they would have done in particular is that they would have, spread calypso and soca abroad. So we recognize that calypso music and soca music had its heyday, yeah, in the 1950s, and then it was replaced by rock and roll. We know that history. We know about, you know, Harry Belafonte and the contribution that he would have made to getting calypso, known outside of the Caribbean. We speak about Nat King Cole and others who would have, done the singing of the music. So what has to happen now? We have to have a resurgence. We have to have a commitment from those who are invested in that calypso and soca space to not necessarily follow the exact blueprint of what Jamaica did with their reggae and their dancehall, but with an intention to get the music out, with an intention to ensure that this music also can be a prominent music and then have that increasing dominance on a global stage.
Going back to your title as researcher, and Calypso had its dominance and heyday, I think, in the 50s. Do you see it circulating back like a circle of life and that will resurge again in the future?
Well, we can hope. We can do more than hope as well. We can actually take the steps. So we know what happened. We know what happened in that heyday. We know that Calypsonians, talk about Lion and Tiger as an example, leaving Trinidad and Tobago and coming out, they would have come to the United States, would have been New York, would have been New Orleans, and certain spaces. And this is why we spoke just now. I spoke just now about the Kaiso jazz and that fusion that would have been taking place. We see those elements that existed in the 1950s and in that time, in those decades, thereafter. And we also see that they also went to Europe, and so that becomes important to understand in terms of the spaces. There would have also been that Latin America infiltration. So if we know what took place, we know we can use it per se as a blueprint. Then to answer your specific question of can you see that coming back around? Yes. Yes, it is quite possible. But there needs to be a concerted effort by the persons who have an investment or who have an invested interest in calypso music and soca music to get involved, to take it to the next level. When we talk about getting a category in the Grammys, making it happen, letting it be on that global stage, right?
That refers to dollars and cents.
It does, indeed.
No questions about
All right, but the thing is, who are the persons who will stand up and say they are willing to put their dollars and cents behind calypso and soca music for it to become a globally competitive music? That's what has to happen.
it. I look at music as a relay. Um, when I see Sparrow perform a few years ago in Times Square, he was on fire. And when I look back in the audience, it's Spanish. It was people very diverse. And he took us there. We need to look at him, not bypass him, but look at him, and then go to the next level. I think a lot of the new generation coming is not looking at what was there before and just trying to go to the top without understanding the history or the blueprint that has been built for them to take it to that next level.
Well, there's some elements of that taking place, but I think that increasingly some of the artists have recognized when they come out of Trinidad and Tobago, because of course, soca music is a music that is very dominant for carnivals, and they think that it's the most popular music in Trinidad and Tobago or at diasporic carnivals when they visit and or when they go to perform. But then they realize that soca music came from somewhere. And that is when they started to do their own research and discover that it's really calypso. That is the music that people know. It's really calypso music that was the dominant music in the 1950s. It's really calypso music that was able to transform the industry. Yeah? What little there is of it in Trinidad and Tobago. So then they get back to their roots and they recognize that who were some of the major performers? Who were the ones who were responsible for taking this music abroad for us to be able now to have this platform. And that's why. So a lot of people now are going back, people meaning the artists are going back to their roots and understanding, let's listen to what Kitchener had to say, let's listen to what Sparrow had to say, let's listen to what Chocolates had to say, let's listen to what some of these, you spoke about Bomber, you talk about Terror, let's listen to what these men were singing about and where this art form really came from. What were the topics? What were the issues? Why was it done? What does it say about our history? I think a lot of people are doing that now. A lot of artists are doing that now, and that is informing the music in a different way. Yeah.
Beautiful. If we could end with you reading from the book,
Right.
Caribbean Music, published by the University of the West Indies, which is made up of a collection of Caribbean authors from across the region.
Indeed. Now, because I have an article in this, I would prefer to read from my article, right, which I indicated earlier, is entitled Womanhood, Femininity, and Gender Justice in Trinidad and Tobago Music. And I actually want to read, a few snippets of the actual stories, because what I did for this particular article is I did interviews with the specific female music, performers, and I want to speak to some of their stories just briefly. So I'm going to start with someone who is actually spans several genres: gospel, calypso, neo soul, and neo soca, because you have all of those derivatives coming up. And she says, I've always had a bittersweet resolutions with regard to the whole issue of femininity. Unmistakably, anytime a woman does or achieves anything, it will be regarded with a note of lesser. Because whether learned or taught, we've always been defined as the weaker sex. So things that a woman may feel naturally proud about accomplishing automatically become astounding and not natural. I want to read now from another female whose genres are urban contemporary and neo soul. And she says, my very existence expresses my own womanhood. So it's a different perspective because we see it's a different type of genre. It may not be identical to that of others, but showing up and shaping the different spaces I inhabit is the first step. And so we were speaking about that earlier, Alton, about how do we make change? You have to show up. Yeah? The stereotypical nurturing trope is one that I have repurposed, I think, and the attention and sensitivity I lend to my projects involved is such a definitely fueled way in which nurturing energy comes out. There is no getting away from the connection between body and womanhood, and I think I have made peace with my brand of self-expression. Speaking now to somebody who is solely in Calypso. Womanhood is not a concept that cannot be, is a concept rather that cannot be easily defined. Being a woman means being an equal, but still being considered a minority. So we see in the Calypso art form that is how it is felt. Being a part of it, but still seeking individuality. Being a 21st century woman, but holding on to tradition. Turning now to someone who is in the rock. I spoke about this rock genre or soft rock and urban contemporary. Womanhood in today's society has not changed since women's lib. So we have somebody saying, oh no, nothing has taken place. Yes, we can vote. Yes, gender equality is a thing, but then what? We are still reduced to sexual objects and our opinions are not appreciated unless we have academia behind our name or even as the last resort. And then I turn now to looking at this last female. She also spans Calypso and urban contemporary. And she says, the contributions of women worldwide are being highlighted in various ways, and there appears to be more of an appreciation for the need to acknowledge and respect women and what they can bring and have brought in a whole spectrum of disciplines. And so I felt it was important to share the perspectives of the women because I think it's important that we see womanhood, femininity, and gender justice in the music of Trinidad and Tobago. Oftentimes, we don't always speak about the female contribution in the art form, and I think it becomes important given that it is mainly known as a male-dominated Afro art form, and it becomes important to hear the viewpoint of women in Calypso and then women who are outside of Calypso because they too are performing and saying something about the society of Trinidad and Tobago. Yeah.
Thank you for reading. Before we end, if you could tell us what's on the horizon for you.
Ah, okay.
Another book?
Well, yes. I actually have two book projects, and they will be along the lines of looking at Calypso again, looking at issues related to culture, looking at festival culture. I'm going to be doing some branching off on that, but I'm not going to be looking at festival culture in the way that it has traditionally been looked at. I'm going to be doing a reinterpretation of that and focusing on the musical aspect and the different spaces where the festival cultures exist and what is some of the music that exists and what that music is engendering or creating or saying about these specific societies. I think across societal analysis is necessary when looking at Caribbean music. And though I spoke earlier about the silos that exist in terms of the English speaking Caribbean, French speaking Caribbean, Spanish speaking Caribbean, and Dutch speaking Caribbean, and then spaces that were the former Danish territories like the Virgin Islands of the US, it still becomes important to understand what music is saying overall about the Caribbean and our contribution, because Alton, of course, you spoke about this global stage. And if we have to represent our region, we have to understand each other at the root.
Thank you, Professor. And I'm saying Professor because that's the title someone gave you on there.
All right, yes.
Professor. So thanks for having us.
Dr. Chen.
So this is a great conversation. Thanks for coming.
Yes.
We'll definitely be in touch with your future novel.
Right.
The series continues. I think we're going to the nature island of Dominica with a poet from Dominica along with Shan. We have authors from across the region coming up for Caribbean Heritage Month. So Thursday is the next one. And do not forget our grand finale on June 26th, which is for Caribbean Heritage Month for Carnival Festival in Brooklyn Public Library, Grand Army Plaza. We coming to just showcase what we have in a different light. And every aspect of Carnival will be showcased, not just fancy and broad, but big costumes, small costumes, full mass, and we're going to explore and tell people we had to make a statement, not in the background. So thanks again for having us, and we'll be in touch. Tropicalfete.com.